Our moderator for this plenary is Adrienne Nazon, the U of I Systems Vice President of External Relations and Communications. It's all yours, Adrienne.
Thank you very much, Deneen. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited for this session, in particular because all that we've been, I think it brings together a lot of all that we've been talking to, but in particular, it focuses on leadership. And so for all the things that we've talked about, what does it mean to lead in this moment? So, we're meeting at a moment when higher education is being asked harder questions. We've talked about that really at probably any point in our history. Some of those questions are overdue, as we've talked about. Some are uncomfortable, and some cut right to the core of sort of who we are. But here's the thing. Universities have never been more essential, more challenged. We're educating the most diverse generation in history, navigating technical disruption at a pace that we haven't seen, and we're trying to serve communities that are changing faster than our institutions are changing. Navigating all of this while evolving and advancing the individual and collective missions of our universities takes leadership. It requires real, authentic, courageous leadership, and that's what we're here to discuss today. So with me to do that are three stellar leaders. I'm going to start here with Juan Salgado, and Juan Salgado is the chancellor of City Colleges of Chicago, where he oversees a system serving more than 73,000 students, most of them Black and Latina. Under his leadership, the system has achieved historic gains in enrollment outcomes, workforce partnerships, and financial stability. He brings a community-centered perspective on trust, equity, and opportunity. So thank you for joining us. Seated next to him is Thomas Gibson, and he is the chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. After previously leading UW Stevens Point and serving in student affairs leadership roles across multiple institutions, he brings a deep understanding of student success, institutional transformation, and the realities of leading both regional and urban contexts. We're really interested in hearing his perspective. Thanks for being here. Thank you. And then on the furthest seat is Charles Isbell, Jr. Charles Isbell is the chancellor of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, a computationalist, AI researcher, and nationally recognized leader in accessible education at scale. He's led major academic units at Georgia Tech and served as provost at UW-Madison. He brings a future-facing lens to what leadership must look like in an era of rapid technological change, and I'm excited to have all of you with us. So let's get to it. This morning's lecture didn't sugarcoat it. Public trust is eroding. We've talked about that. It's been eroding for a long time. People questioning the value, and many of you, your institutions are embedded in sort of the community and having a lot of that community contact. You're seeing some of these things up close and personally, but you also are involved in the transformational work that's happening. And so why don't we start there? I mean, Juan, I'd like to begin with you because you serve some of the communities where trust gaps are most visible and consequential, quite frankly. From your vantage point, what leadership choices matter most in rebuilding trust?
Yeah, it was said before, but it's worth saying again. We have to have an exceptional ability to listen to our students, our families, and our communities. We have to be able to speak to that same audience, and most importantly, we have to deliver at the end of the day, right? And I think if we do those three things, and affordability is the tip of the iceberg for that, right? It's got to be addressed, but it's really only the beginning. It's kind of like a down payment, right, on what we really need to be doing, and that is, we need to be noticing who's not in our institutions and why, right? For city colleges, for many years we saw large declines in our Black students, quite frankly. And it's easy to say, oh, population loss. No, there's enough population out there of students that could get the value of a city college's education in the Black community. We have to do a better job of delivering for that community, attracting the community. And we need to build systems to be able to do that. And when you do that, it engenders further confidence and further trust. It was shared earlier. We build a systems level partnership. We've got to work in collaboration on the biggest things with the Chicago Public Schools. And went from about 4,000 students getting dual credit, dual enrollment to now over 9,000. But that's not the story. The story is Black students are overrepresented among the students that are getting this early college credit, that are getting 15 credits or more, right? And so we did it in an intentional way in small schools, in all places, right? And that begins to build, the kind of credibility that I'll tell you right now, our highest growing demographic among the city colleges, growth in enrollment. We've had tremendous growth. Fastest growing community college in the state of Illinois, which in the last 2 years has grown by over 90%, is Kennedy King College in the middle of Inglewood, right? One of the most economically challenged communities in the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois. And I will just say, it's growing because there's trust and confidence that has been built by our ability to deliver to a community that was not attending our colleges for many, many years. It is now our largest demographic in terms of growth, Black men, 41% growth in the last 3 years, followed by Black women, and by the way, we're not too far behind Latino men. And you all know the rates of men coming into higher education have been going down. So we got to pay attention to who's not there. We've got to deliver for those communities, and we've got to make sure that we're doing so in collaboration. Later on, I hope to share a little bit more of not just the tremendous work that we've done with IUC, my alma mater, by the way. Thank you so much, for this valuable degree in urban planning, but also the work that we're doing with UIC and Nikos Varelis, who's here, and just the breakthrough possibilities that come from when you work together and you catalyze upon the assets. I think that's what the public wants to see us do, right? The public wants to see, this isn't about marketing. This is about them feeling that we are there for them and we're there together for them. And that's what needs to be felt at the human level.
Well, I appreciate that. So I appreciate that one of the leadership choices is to set a vision that's anchored in insight and from being in community and talking to people, and then having that culture of engagement that's spreading throughout your organization. Thomas or Charles, any other leadership choices that you think are really critical to rebuilding that trust?
Absolutely. So I will respond. I think it's important to keep perspective, because not all mistrust of higher education is universal. For an example, at my institution, just last year, we welcomed the largest incoming class of students since 2009. And that increase represented an 11% increase over the prior year. And additionally, we heard this morning about some of the dire outlooks from various polls and surveys. But most recently, Vanderbilt University, as well as the Illumina Foundation Gallup Education Survey, both saw an increase in Americans' confidence of higher education in comparison to recent years. And I think that perhaps one of the factors for this shift is the research that's being done on our campuses. More Americans are beginning to recognize the role that research universities are playing in solving some of society's most thorniest problems. Another point of observation for me is the fact that UWM really prides itself on this mission of access, research, and community engagement. And that has really led to some meaningful partnerships with other higher education institutions, public schools, technical colleges. And when communities see institutions of higher education partnering in a way for the public good of our students and for our society, that helps to build trust.
That's great. I appreciate that. I don't know what happened to my mic, but I appreciate that we talked about that a little bit earlier, this notion of balancing the conversation, right? That there isn't all about the mistrust. There is some trust that we could build on. And
There's some bright spots.
yeah, so I appreciate that as a particular leadership choice to have a positive narrative related to that. Charles?
So thank you. So first off, let me apologize up front. Some of you know I've been losing my voice, but hopefully with the help of at least 8 different people, mostly at that table, bringing me honey and hot water and a powerful microphone, I can sound like I'm doing the Quiet Storm in a late night radio show. So I apologize up front. I want to emphasize this point about listening and what it means to actually listen to the sort of decision here. So a lot of times when we talk about listening, and you've all experienced this personally, we're not really listening, we're waiting for our turn to speak. And people can sense that. They know when you're not really paying attention to them, but you're just waiting to get your point in. And when you do that, you lose trust. You actively lose trust. But I think there's something else that's going on when we talk about listening, and you've heard it a little bit today, and you've heard it in some of the answers just before me. About a year or so ago, I was leading this strategic planning exercise with a group of people, and of course they were talking about communication. We have to tell our story better. Same thing that we've been hearing, and we've been thinking for quite a while. I was listening to them closely, and someone whispered something in my ear, and I thought, let me stop this for a second. And what I told them is, I'm listening to you, and I think that as you're in your tables talking, if I were just a guy walking off the street, here's what I think I would be hearing you say. If we can just come up with the right small words to convince these people that what we do is important, then they'll shut up, leave us alone, and give us money. And that's really what we want. And I know that's not what you mean. I hope it's not what you mean, but it can sound that way. So let's do an exercise. So the exercise is, let's assume they're right and we're wrong. If they were, I'm not saying they're right, but let's assume they were. If they were right about everything, then what would he be saying differently? What would he be doing differently? And if we would be saying things differently, if we would be doing things differently, then we have to take seriously the idea that they are right about some things, or they believe they are, and it might as well be the same thing. And decide how not only are we going to try to tell our story better, but have a better story to tell. And I think this idea of leadership through listening, of institutions trying to have the kind of impact that I know that we all want to have, starts with the idea that your audience is at least as important as you are, and that you have to actually listen to what they're saying and try to meet them where they are. And that is a difficult thing to do, particularly if you've been trained, like many of the people in this room, to stand on a stage and tell people what the correct answer is. Perhaps they know as well.
No, that's great.
Could I add an additional thought?
Sure, please.
Adrienne, I think as leaders of our respective institutions, I think that we would agree that sometimes it is so easy to get caught in an echo chamber. We're listening to our direct reports, we're listening to a number of different advisors, but there's not very many opportunities, unless it's intentional, to really have this broad pipeline of access to stakeholders and other individuals that could really shed light on different perspectives. So we have to work extremely hard, because sometimes we have folks who support us, but instead of being bridges, they may serve as gatekeepers, and that's not helpful.
No, that's great. One of the things I heard you saying, Charles, was really about this, one of the leadership choices that we need to make in this moment is about inviting the discourse, encouraging the discourse to have some of those provocative conversations that might help us get to a different place. I want to shift focus just a little bit here. Robert talked about this morning about people who want this job. The job is multifaceted. I think it sort of always has been, but it's also become a role that's played in multiple stages all at once. We're talking here about trust and about communities and about engagement and what that all means. But you all are expected to be engines of workforce development, partners in regional innovation, anchors of community well-being, collaborators with industry and government. And I'd love to have a little bit of conversation about how all of this is reshaping the job. We haven't really talked about, the same job it was some time ago. And Thomas, I'd like to begin with you. You've led institutions at both regional and urban contexts. You've built partnerships across K through 12 workforce and community sectors. How is the role of president for you evolving in this broader civic and innovation ecosystem?
Absolutely. So the chancellors and presidents of higher ed institutions are wearing more hats than ever before. We are the face of our institution. We are the cheerleaders within the community. We are the chief advocate among legislators on both sides. Diplomacy has never been more important. As you noted, we are the chief fundraisers, inspiring individuals to invest in our respective universities. We are the thought leaders, providing the direction for tens of thousands of students, faculty, staff, and alumni. And I would say most recently, we have become social media influencers because we are needing to meet our students, our faculty, and all stakeholders where they are at, communicating in a way that sounds familiar to them, and likely in less than 280 characters.
If you haven't seen the YouTube of the 24 questions to you, it's wonderful.
Oh, thanks. Right, thanks, yeah. My team, they push me quite a bit to be active on the various social media platforms, and truthfully, I embrace it.
So, Charles, you've come along, you've been in this game for a while. How have you seen it be reshaped and the leadership expectations as a result of that?
Well, we're increasingly public. We're increasingly, exactly as you said. By the way, you got to go past YouTube and you got to get on Insta.
Right.
Whatever it is that kids are doing.
Right.
I will put in a plug, so we're trying to get 1 million views. I'm on Hot Ones. If you don't know what Hot Ones is, ask your kids. Ask them nicely, but it's a good one there. I think when we think about what the job is, I think a lot of people, insofar as they think about these jobs from the outside the sector, they think either we're principals because they have a model of that, although they don't know what principals do, or they think maybe we're CEOs, and various of us have different kinds of autonomy to be that kind of thing or not. But I think regardless of that, it's closer that we're mayors. We're mayors of a small or even large town, which is made up of a lot of different constituencies with a lot of different views of what's important, an unstable tax base, and we're surrounded by lots of other cities who have very strong opinions about what we ought to be doing, which means mostly we're about influencing. We're about trying to provide resources for others so that they can accomplish the things that they want to accomplish. So it's less about, I think leadership in general, and certainly in the world that we're in now, is less about being directive. It's less about saying this, that, and the other. And it's more about bringing people along so that they can believe that their goals are aligned with your goals, your vision, and the goals and vision of the institutions that you are being asked to lead. And that's a very different, I don't know if it's always been that way. I wasn't a chancellor in 1987, so I don't know. But it feels like that's become more and more true as we've been asked to do more and more social services as opposed to student services, as we've been asked to be politicians in the true sense of the word, and to connect with all of the people around us. And I think it's hard, but to take on something that Robert said about why would you want this job and what do you think it is? I think the important thing there is you don't want the job. if your goal is to be a president or a chancellor or whatever, then you're doing it wrong. This has to be a means to an end. You have to want to have some kind of impact on the world, and this is a way in which you can do it, whether that's access or bringing people the ability to have an education, or whatever it is that drives you every morning. It has to be that, and this has to be the thing that allows you to help others to do that, not the job itself.
I just want to, pick up on that. I didn't come from higher education. I came from leading the not-for-profit, and I've been in this role for 9 years now. Okay, and I didn't come into, I didn't aspire to be a chancellor. I aspired to make a difference in Chicago for the people of Chicago, and so I think that what needs to drive that desire to be in that role is the desire to make an impact. And yet the fundamentals, and I don't know how it was years ago, but I think it is very different now. The fundamentals of success have to be trust building. You're a trust builder. Mm-hmm. That's what you do every single day. And there's a lot of tools that you use in order to build trust. And the universe of people that need to trust you and trust in your leadership and trust in the institution and what it's doing and how it's going to deliver is expanding quite a bit, right? And the expectations, right, that we as leaders put upon ourselves, but are put upon us as well, right? We have to own that, okay? And we have to understand that that's what we signed up for, right? We're in Chicago, very diverse city. I have to meet the expectations of every constituency group, and each one of those constituent groups are distinct, have their own story, have different set of needs, and I have to show up ready, to fully understand, fully appreciate, and fully plan for and address each one of those specific needs. And if I can do that effectively, right, not perfectly, right, but honestly, then I build currency, right, and that currency is trust, and trust allows an institution to grow, to advance, to greater impact. And so that is the fundamental skill that anyone that's interested in doing this ought to be developing today, and that carries with you, right, wherever you go.
Yeah, no, that's great insight and a great segue into our next question, which is taking all of those skills together. We talked about all the challenges that are going on in higher ed, and someone talked about this morning that slow to change is something that we embrace for certain aspects of what we do, that there's value in them. I think I heard that this morning. But higher education has been characterized as slow to change in some ways, but none of you in your seats has had the luxury of moving slowly. We talked about the expanding role and all the things that are required there. And you're steering institutions through, we've talked about demographic shifts and political pressures and financial constraints, and now what some call this tidal wave of AI, right? And Robert talked about that as too. If there was a leadership playbook, don't you wish there was one? That you could do this. Much of it has evolved, and the pace of it has accelerated. But I thought we'd talk now about the skills that actually matter now in being a strong leader for an institution. Skills, competencies. I'll take both sets of those, or maybe start with you, Charles.
So I mean, it's an interesting question, right? Because you can talk about the ability to communicate. You can talk. I mean, there are all kinds of things you could do, but I think if I were to pop up a level on the question, it would be to really lean into the way you frame this question around change. You have to have a willingness and a tolerance to be bold. And that's not as easy as it sounds or as it seems, because being bold requires change, and it requires leading people through change in big ways as you sort of swing for the fences. In fact, in some ways, it's a bit of a contradiction. Because on the one hand, you have to be, and this is a fundamental thing I think you have to be able to do, is you have to be patient, right? You have to wait for the long term. You have to look out not just next year or the year after, but look decades into the future. But at the same time, you have to be fundamentally impatient with the status quo. And doing that balance, I don't think is obvious or easy, particularly for many of us in these positions, because a lot of us got here by making change to systems that were there before us and seeing a thing that needs to be different. And now we are here leading these kinds of, having these kinds of roles where we're leading these organizations, and we are at a time when we are also going to have to change. And in a moment like this, when it feels like everything's on the line, because everything is on the line, you have to balance this urge to protect everything that you built against the need to let it change into whatever it is it needs to be going forward. So you have to find the kernel of what it is you do and protect that, not the edifice that surrounds it, not the details of what it is. And this is difficult because if we're going to be frank about it, we're all ambitious people. We are empire builders, and we've risen to a position where it turns out that the actual job is not our own ambition or building our own thing. It's to enable others to do that, to set up the people who are going to follow. We are not the point. It's those who follow us who are. And so what we have to remember, a thing that a lot of people have heard me say before, is that if we want to hold on to the things that we have done, if we want things to stay the same, things are going to have to change. And that can be scary, but I actually find it comforting. We achieve our immortality by knowing when and how to pass on, by knowing when and how we have to accept the changes in the universities we've built, the systems we've built, the sectors we've built, the way things were that got us to where we are, and to set the world up for whatever it is that has to follow. We have to both lead people into that, and we have to lead ourselves individually into that. That's what it means to be a good ancestor, right? Is to set up and allow the change to happen, knowing that it'll be built upon the things that you've done, however that affects you and however that affects the people around us. And I don't know if that's a skill or an attitude, but I do think it matters fundamentally, particularly when we're in a world where every week a decade has passed.
Now, I want to come back to this question of ancestry before we end, but maybe Thomas, I'll go to you. And is this something that you've thought about and want to share?
Sure. Everything that Charles just shared, no, I'll offer two brief thoughts. I think that institution leaders must be open to the unusual. You've noted that there's no playbook for this moment that we find ourselves in. So that requires new ways and different ways of knowing and doing, and the courage, if you will, to endeavor to pursue risky opportunities, but may very well bring about significant rewards. The other thought that I have is really practical, and that is that institutional leaders need to have thick skin. And did I touch a nerve? and because we are charged with making a number of different decisions that will more likely than not alienate some of our stakeholders. But with that said, we still are charged to make these more difficult decisions, and I think that that's okay. We need to make them despite the barrage of criticisms that will likely come our way.
No, that's great.
Just As a little context to that, my first 30 days was unfortunately having to let go of over 130 people in a sort of terrible financial situation. I've been there for 9 years. Then we had a pandemic, right? So, and now we have this period of time, whatever you want to call this period of time. But I think that we have to be the certainty among the uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty out there in moments like this, right? There's a lot of uneasiness. We have to understand that our role is to be that rock, be that stability, and yet, as Charles was saying, move the institution to a different place, and actually, use the opportunity, right, that we have in front of us to do that, right? The pandemic was an opportunity. This time period is an opportunity. For City Colleges of Chicago, we're speaking to our students. We're basically saying, wow, the federal government is taking away, your SNAP benefits, while they're taking away your Medicaid, right? We are going to fundamentally focus on your basic needs, okay? We are going to end food insecurity. We're going to fully cover the mental health and wellness needs that you have, right? We're going to go counter current in every way, shape, or form, right? So I think we also as leaders have the time, right? I wish I could have done this in year one, but it's perfectly timed right now to be able to do it, right? Because it sends it's a different opportunity point, right? And I think we have to be ready for those moments.
No, that's great. So I have other questions, but I want to invite you, if you have any questions, to please use your cards and share those. We'll be happy to engage our folks on that as well. So we've talked about a lot of things, and we've talked about that there's this desire to move forward, the importance and criticality of leadership in this moment, and what are some of the kind of characteristics, and yet that doesn't mean necessarily that we're going to thrive. And so I want to just turn, for a minute to this notion of thriving. And this is where I'm going to come back to your ancestry sort of question. So, many, as we've all seen in the face of challenges, have gone into survival mode, right? And you were just talking about this. So budget survival, enrollment survival, political survival. But that's not true, really, for any of you. You've continued to push forward a proactive agenda. So what will it take, in your opinions, to not just endure the next decade, but to truly shape it? And you've talked about some elements of that, but I'd love to sort of dig a little bit deeper on that. But to explore it, just to throw in a little bit of spice, let's fast forward 10 years and look back at this moment and look back at it as if you have sort of the clarity of hindsight. And what are the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about now in order to ensure that we are delivering something that's thriving and not just surviving? I'll open it up. Who wants to jump in first? Charles, you look ready.
Oh, let Charles go.
Okay. I don't know that I look ready, but okay. The universities that I think that are going to be the ones thriving in the end. So first off, we have to put this in the context that we talk about universities, but just on this stage here, we're very different kinds of universities or systems of universities. We are very different, right? There's no one up here representing the Ivy League, which is very different. I'm a land grant. I will point out that MIT is a land grant, but doesn't look like any of the land grants that we think of. We're community colleges, we're R1s, we're R2s, we are all of these things, and so we're all very different. And so I think the answer will be in the context of the individual universities that we're talking about, the sectors of universities. Having said that, I think that when we look back 10 years from now, 15 years from now, or whatever, the universities that will be thriving will be the ones that chose to lead. And that requires taking risk. It requires really going for big things and fighting for the things you believe in. It is understanding that kernel, protecting that kernel, but then taking the risks, even the ones that are a little scary, in order to push forward. I tell my faculty and my colleagues all the time that one of the wonderful things about this university, and in particular the state we are in, is that we are in a place where we can afford to be braver than many of our colleagues. The legislature is not trying to destroy us. The governor is not trying to destroy us. In fact, they're trying to help us and do everything that they can, listening to us as we listen to them. It is upon us as both an opportunity as an obligation to take advantage of that and to try to do big things that are going to make a difference for the people in our neighborhoods, the people in our state, the people in the country and the world. And I think when we look back, and we're going to see a shuffling of where people are. We're going to see people who are over here who are now in the conversation. We're going to see people who are leading who you don't talk about anymore. And I think the difference is going to be the ones who have decided to be bold and decided to lead, put their chin out a little bit. Don't get over your skis. That's proof that I've been in the Midwest. I said, don't get over your skis, which I think I know what that means. But still, you have to lean forward a little bit. If you are holding back, if you're trying to keep your head, maybe no one will look at us, then you're going to wake up one day and you're going to realize you've been walking, other people have been running, and you are much, much further behind than you would have been. And that's a disservice to your institutions, and it's a disservice to the people you serve.
Well said. Please jump in.
To build on that, I think we need to lead, and we need to lead together, and we need to look at new value creation that does not exist today. And I want to use the example of what we're doing with UIC right now in Chicago, right? 10 years from now, and even sooner than that, by the way, every 8th grader going into 9th grade and their parent is going to have a roadmap. Generations, of students, by then, several iterations of students will have this roadmap that shows them exactly what they need to do while they're in high school to save affordability and take those, college credits while they're in high school, to then clearly transfer to UIC or into city colleges, right? To use the 4 years post high school, not just to get a bachelor's degree, but to get the master's degree, using the financial, capabilities that they have, in order to do that. We are going to map that out in such a clear way and use our relationships with the public schools to make sure that we have a delivery mechanism, and a communication mechanism that's widely felt and understood, right? And the power of both institutions. That is not there today. Today you got sort of like the wild, wild west, and it's just, people are trying to figure this out on their own, right? And so we're creating an entirely different value proposition that will be felt. And it's going to be things like that. The second one I would point to is I hope, and we're going to do what we can at city colleges to make sure that we have a cultural understanding across the nation of the critical importance of college graduates with the first meaningful job, okay, in their career. And that we invest across industries to make sure that we make that reality, because that's undercutting right now as we speak the future capabilities all across our nation. And so, so what can we be doing today together to drive that message to industry, right? That it's short-sighted, and what kind of tools and resources are we putting in place in order to make that a better reality for our students that are completing.
I like that you and Charles both talked about. Part of it is having that bold vision that's rooted in outcomes, rooted in sort of what is it that we want to see. I don't know, Thomas, I'd like to give you an opportunity to answer that as well.
Few thoughts. I think that on a very practical level, institutions that will thrive are the ones that had been successful in breaking down silos. And those institutions that have been able to identify centers of excellence at their institution and be able to scale it. Additionally, I don't know that we do this very often in institutions of higher education, but we need to engage in sunsetting exercises. We need to identify, I see, is it clock it? My students tell me clock it. Okay. We have programs, services, and activities that we need to evaluate to determine if they are indeed achieving desired outcomes. And we are so traditional that we never take the time to determine whether or not if these efforts are worth our time, our resources, and investments. And then lastly, I would argue that we need to be better prepared to serve all types of students. And I think our colleagues in the two-year and technical college space does that quite well. But four-year research institutions, regional comprehensives, I think there's still opportunities for us to think about how we create more on-ramps for more types of students.
That's great. Do I have time for one more? Yeah. So now I want to turn to just a quick lightning round. So don't overthink it. Quick sort of instinctive reflections, but just a sentence or two from each of you. So one trend higher education leaders are underestimating.
All of them. Because we know it's true, but we don't believe it. We're hoping it won't affect us.
Wait, I don't think we heard you. Can you say it again?
We know all the things that are coming. We've seen the trends, whether they're demographic trends or they're whatever, but we hope that it's not going to matter. I mean, this whole conversation we've been having about trust, this was the least since the 1980s we've been having this conversation about whether we're a public good or a private good, and we let 40 years pass before we started trying to actually point out that we are a public good. So the demographic cliff, you know how long they've been talking about the demographic cliff? I've been hearing about it since I was like 12 years old. I don't even know what that means, and yet and here we are, right? So I think we know what the trends are. Pick any 5 of them. The question is whether we're acting on them now before they become an emergency. And I think the answer for the sector, no one on this stage, of course, we're all doing what we're supposed to do. But for the sector, we're hoping none of them actually affect us.
Well, he said all of them, so I guess that's the answer.
Well, I'll offer one. AI is top of mind for me, and I think that higher ed leaders need to understand that while students certainly enjoy utilizing AI as an assistant, but at the same time, they still appreciate and want human contact and personal interactions. So institutions of higher education is going to have to balance utilizing AI as an efficiency tool with the desires of students, again, for meaningful, real contact.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Okay, question. One leadership practice that will matter more in the future. So if we talked about a playbook that's evolving and what's something you think that's you're going to need more in the future than maybe you need right now?
The ability to take his questions. You have a bunch of questions he's trying to
Oh, did he? Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't see that. Thank you.
Collaboration is that, critical skill and attribute. It's going to be needed more and more. We are going to see the pressures of climate change and, other events, if you will, in the future, and we need to be ready for them. The only way to be ready for them is together.
I would offer a guiding principle. I think increasingly we will need something to point to as our institutions weathers changes and significant pressures. I think it will also serve as a reminder of our why for stakeholders. And I think that having this why will help us get through some of our most challenging periods.
Yeah, I like that. So we do have a couple of questions. Let me try and run through a couple of these. We know institutions are closing, and more need to do so. How do you see your role in helping the state address the need to consolidate, reduce programs, majors, or in some cases, close altogether? Provocative.
You guys can answer that.
Well, we don't have a role in that. We have a role in making sure we're achieving our mission with great fidelity, that we're reaching the populations that we're called upon to reach them, that we're serving our students and our communities. And I think I think some of that will occur without question. I don't think there's a responsible party in that, if you will. At least anyone that's outside, those institutions. I do think, to what you're saying, in some cases, those institutions failed to make decisions a long time ago. And because they failed to make decisions a long time ago to position themselves better for the marketplace or to, get out of certain disciplines or programs, it strained the resources. And then it's a warning to us all that we should be careful not to do the same in the future, should we end up in the same predicament.
So let's take the premise seriously. So the premise is, we didn't have to where the things need to close or whatever, but underlying it is the idea that, let's just take the state of Illinois, we find ourselves in a place of demographic change. People are place-bound, our institutions are often place-bound. We're seeing shifts in density across the state in a variety of ways. Funding, even as it goes up, still feels flat. People are demanding more of us. We're dealing with things on the outside, and that's creating pressure. So if we take that idea seriously, which I think we should, then the first thing I think is to recognize that it is a problem for all of us. Whether there is a responsible party or not, it is something that is affecting all of us. And so we don't want to let the fact that it is big and no one of us is responsible get in the way of actually dealing with it. So being a Southerner, I have a lot of expressions. And my favorite one is, how do you starve a dog? The way you starve a dog is you assign 4 people to feed it. Because then it's nobody's responsibility, right? Nothing ever gets done. So this is one of these big problems where nobody wants to deal with it because it's so big. But we collectively can do the thing that we've all talked about, including everyone before us, which is lead, right? What do we do to convene conversations with all of the responsible parties, all the parties, constituents in this state, to figure out how to think about this problem that's coming down the pike, whether it's 5 years from now or 25 years from now. It may require doing something radical. It may require doing something very simple. But exactly what you said is important, which is someone did or did not make a decision 5 years ago, and now they're where they are. So it's too late to deal with it now. You needed to have dealt with it 5 years ago. So I think the question for us with this is, what decisions do we need to make now so it's not an emergency in 5 or 10 years? What is the plan? What is the conversation? Who are the people who need to see what's going on and then engage in the conversation? And it is not going to be an easy one, but it is all of ours, right? When I tell my people all the time, don't talk to me about your building. All buildings belong to the good people of the state of Illinois. It's not my university. It's not our system. It belongs to the people of the state, the good people of the state of Illinois. And so it is upon us to figure out how to have these conversations with them so that we can be set up for 2037.
Yeah, that theme of deep collaboration and what that brings to almost all of these topics that we've talked about today is really important. How are you addressing an atmosphere of uncertainty, especially as more scholars self-censor at your institutions? What responsibility do chancellors have to speak out publicly even when it carries institutional risk? It's a very timely question that I'm sure you've been thinking about. I don't know, Tom, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So in the state of Wisconsin, we are at a disadvantage. And what I mean by that is that there's policies that are currently in place, neutrality policies that does not allow us to speak out on controversial issues or geopolitical issues or issues of the day if there's not a direct relationship with the mission of the institution. But as chancellor, I certainly support our faculty and our staff leaning on our institutional values and speaking out in a way that is best reflective of the goals and hopes that we have for each and every member of our university community.
Can I just say one thing about neutrality? So by the way, I'll just put it out there. I have never been a fan of big institutional statements going back years and years and years, because it always felt like we were making statements on the things that were easy for us to make statements on. And I remember thinking as an associate professor, one of these days, we're gonna have to make a statement on something where the answer isn't obvious, and all our constituencies have very different opinions about it. And what are we gonna do then? And here we are, right? So I've never been a fan of that, but that's not the same thing as pretending that we don't hold a political position in the world as institutions, particularly public institutions, but just in general in the world. I think that it is a mistake to think that the goal is neutrality. The goal is objectivity, and neutrality is one means to that end. So what universities are very good at, or should be very good at, is convening people and allowing the provocative conversations to happen and being a trusted partner in leading those, or being a part of facilitating those conversations wherever they lead us, which will make everyone happy and everyone unhappy, and there's kind of no way around that. So if we think of our role as convener and bringing to light the difficulties of whatever issues are out before us, then we can stay true to who we are without taking a position that ultimately it's not even clear that we truly believe when you take it and you play the tape to the end. And that's a difficult thing. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is sort of the thing that we have to spend our time thinking carefully about. What does it mean to bring together people to have conversations? And what is our role, not just in convening those conversations, but giving people the tools to have those conversations? If you manage to go through 4, 5, 6 years of college having never felt uncomfortable, then either you did it wrong or we failed you. So we have to accept that that's a part of our role, and that doesn't require speaking out on everything. What it requires is creating a platform where people can speak out.
No, that's great. Are you calling time? That's a segue to this last question, which is, how do you stay connected to students? You talked about they spend 4 or 5 years there and what happens, but this person wanted to know, how do you stay connected to students and faculty when the administrative tasks of the role are so consuming? And we've talked about that, how expansive they become. Are there some strategies that you all individually use to do that?
Very simply, I go to spaces where students and faculty and staff are. I go to academic buildings unannounced. Again, I'm really intentional about it. One colleague saw me and immediately wanted to know if everything was okay. I reassured her that everything was just fine. I'm just visiting. And students really enjoy seeing their president or chancellor in their spaces. And I had a student once tell me, and obviously I know this because I felt that I was interrupting this lively discussion that they were having. So I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, don't mean to interrupt." And they said, "Chancellor, you are never interrupting us, and you never need an invitation to these spaces."
I do something I started in the pandemic, and it's just, it's like the fuel that I need now. And it's called Check In with the Chancellor. It's an open call that goes to every student institution. It's about an hour and a half to 2, and usually 15 to 20 students. And we're in community together. And there's 7 campuses, so these students from very different campuses. And it's just remarkable that in that time period, you see all of the behaviors, the supporting of each other, the sharing of those critical things that have been helpful to them, right? Some valuable critique of what we can do better. And I get that totally unfiltered. And, what I learned early on is if, I announced, as you're saying, if I announced I was coming to a campus, it would all be curated, right? If I showed up, unannounced sometimes, there's a little bit of commotion and, you know what I mean? Whatnot. So this has been free and clear of that, right? I even had a student, that I will just share a story, was actively suing us, and our general counsel said, don't allow her to be on. Absolutely, we won't start her case, but she'll be on. She ended up dropping the lawsuit and helping to train our team better in the areas that she had a critique on. And so the value of these kinds of things is immense.
Right. Well, I don't know if you wanted to add a quick point. It sounds like...
Try to be in the places where they are, and when I'm there, I try to be authentically me, for good or for ill.
Well, that's awesome. Well, as we wrap up, I'm struck by how much of this conversation really comes back to, thinking about our universities and what's core to them and what we need to extract from that to take forward, and how much leadership is really critical to that process. And we're grateful to have all of you leading some of our wonderful institutions. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.